Hands on the table, where I can see them, now. The words, sharp and laced with unearned authority, cut through the gentle afternoon hum of the New York coffee shop. What unfolds next is a factual record, compiled from 3 separate high-definition CCTV angles and the body-worn camera audio and video of NYPD officer Frank Miller. On the afternoon of August 22nd at precisely 2:32 p.m., a routine 10-minute coffee break for one man became the catalyst for the complete professional and financial annihilation of another. This is the documented account of how a single, blatant act of racial profiling, born from deep-seated prejudice, triggered an irreversible cascade of consequences. It is the story of how an illegal stop, driven by ego, cost a 15-year veteran of the police force his career, his pension, and a quantified sum exceeding $400,000 in direct losses and civil liabilities. This is the anatomy of karmic justice, not as a spiritual concept, but as a sequence of events recorded, verified, and irrefutably documented. The setting was a meticulously clean, almost sterile coffee shop in the heart of the financial district, a place where the air smelled of expensive espresso and ambition. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off polished chrome and the screens of laptops, where 6-figure deals were being negotiated over oat milk lattes. Into this world of quiet, focused commerce stepped Mr. David Chen, a 42-year-old senior special agent for the Internal Revenue Service's elite Criminal Investigation Division. Dressed in civilian clothes, a charcoal gray bespoke jacket, and dark trousers that spoke of quality without shouting it, he was the picture of unassuming professionalism. He was on a brief, mandated respite from Operation Hidden Ledger, a multi-agency investigation into a complex offshore tax evasion scheme operating out of an office just 2 blocks away. For the last 72 hours, his world had been a labyrinth of encrypted ledgers, shell corporations, and clandestine money transfers. His mind, one of the most respected analytical instruments in federal law enforcement, was a finely tuned machine, and this 10-minute pause was merely scheduled maintenance. He ordered a black Americano, paid with a tap of his phone, and chose a small table that gave him a clear view of the entrance, a habit ingrained from years of investigative fieldwork. He placed his tablet on the table, the screen displaying a complex spreadsheet that would be meaningless to any casual observer, and began his review, his focus absolute. His presence was calm, self-contained, and utterly unremarkable in a neighborhood filled with the city's power players. But he was remarkable to one person. Outside, on the sun-drenched sidewalk, Officer Frank Miller watched him through the glass. Miller, a 38-year-old with a stocky build and a face set in a permanent scowl, had been with the NYPD for 15 years. His service record, when viewed through the official lens, was adequate, but a deeper look, a look that the narrator is uniquely qualified to take, revealed a troubling pattern. 12 separate internal affairs complaints had been filed against him over the last decade, alleging everything from overly aggressive conduct during traffic stops to unlawful searches. Each complaint, however, was closed due to a lack of what the department deemed conclusive evidence, a bureaucratic turn of phrase that often meant an absence of video footage or a civilian witness deemed unreliable. Miller was a product of a system that had, time and again, given him the benefit of the doubt. He saw the world in stark, simple terms, and in his worldview, a black man of David Chen's bearing, exuding an aura of quiet confidence in this high-rent district, was an anomaly. An anomaly was a problem, and problems were his purview. The security footage from camera 1, positioned above the doorway, captures his entrance. He does not scan the room. His gaze is fixed, his path direct. He ignores a group of boisterous tourists and a woman struggling with a stroller, moving with a predatory purpose towards Chen's table. He activated his body cam the moment he crossed the threshold, a departmental requirement he followed to the letter, never imagining the device intended to protect him would soon become the primary instrument of his ruin. The ambient noise of the cafe is suddenly dominated by the sound of his heavy footsteps on the polished concrete floor. He stopped at the table, casting a shadow over David Chen's work. He did not greet him. He did not introduce himself. He simply issued a command. ID. David Chen looked up slowly, his eyes betraying no surprise, no fear, only a faint, weary curiosity. He was an expert in reading people, and he instantly diagnosed the man before him, an insecure bully wrapped in the armor of a badge. On what grounds, officer? The question was soft-spoken, respectful, yet it landed like a physical blow. It was a request for legal justification, a concept Officer Miller had little patience for. His face, captured in high fidelity on his own camera, flushed with anger. On the grounds that I said so, he snapped, his voice a low growl. I do not like your attitude. Either you give me the ID, or I am taking you in for obstruction. Chen remained perfectly still, his hands resting on the table on either side of his tablet. He was performing a complex series of calculations.
He knew the demand was illegal. There was no reasonable suspicion, let alone probable cause. He also knew that escalating the situation by arguing would give Miller the pretext he was searching for. Every second that passed, multiple cameras were recording, creating an indelible record of the officer's misconduct. His composure was not passive, it was a strategic weapon. Frustrated by a silence he could not intimidate and a calm he could not break, Officer Miller made the single greatest miscalculation of his life. He decided to force the issue, to assert his dominance through physical action, unaware that he was attempting to bully a man who dismantled criminal empires for a living. He reached for the cold steel of the handcuffs on his belt, an action that would trigger a sequence of events far beyond his control and cost him everything he had ever earned. The sharp, metallic rasp of the handcuffs being drawn from their leather pouch was a sound engineered to command submission. It sliced through the cafe's ambient murmur of quiet conversation and clinking ceramic, a punctuation mark of impending force. Every head in the establishment turned. The body cam on Officer Miller's chest, its wide-angle lens capturing the scene with cold impartiality, documented the shift in the room's atmosphere from placid to tense. Across the room, the screen of a smartphone, held by a college student, switched to its video recording function, its small red light, a new unofficial witness. Officer Miller held the cuffs in his right hand, the steel links dangling, a crude pendulum marking the seconds of his escalating aggression. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl meant only for David Chen, yet loud enough for his own microphone to capture with perfect clarity. "You people think you can just walk into places like this," he said. The phrase, "you people," hanging in the air, thick with unspoken prejudice. "You sit here pretending to be on your fancy tablet, but I know what you are really doing. You are casing the joint, looking for a weak spot. I have seen it 100 times. The accusation was so divorced from reality it was almost abstract. David Chen's posture did not change. His hands remained flat on the table, palms down. His gaze remained locked on the officer, not with defiance, but with the dispassionate focus of an analyst observing a predictable, albeit flawed, system in motion. "Officer," he stated, his tone even and devoid of emotion, "I am a federal employee on a mandated 10-minute break. My office is in the adjacent building, Suite 1400. I am reviewing financial data for an active investigation. My presence here is lawful, documented, and entirely non-threatening. I am a customer of this establishment." He was offering an off-ramp, a series of verifiable facts that would allow the officer to de-escalate without losing face. But Miller's worldview had no room for such facts. They were inconvenient data points that contradicted his pre-written narrative of suspicion and guilt. He saw the calm explanation not as truth, but a clever lie, a tactic used by the criminals he imagined he was hunting. His face, already flushed, deepened to a dark crimson. The veins on his thick neck pulsed. "Don't lie to me," he snarled, spitting the words. "Federal employee. You do not look like any federal employee I have ever seen." He took a half-step closer, his physical presence now a clear and deliberate act of intimidation, invading Chen's personal space. "I gave you a lawful order to provide identification. You refused. That is obstruction. Now you are resisting arrest." He gestured with the handcuffs again, the metal glinting under the cafe's track lighting. "This is your last chance. Put your hands behind your back." David Chen slowly shook his head, a minuscule, controlled movement. "Officer, you have not given a lawful order. You have made an illegal demand without reasonable suspicion. There is no crime to obstruct. There is no arrest to resist. Every action you take from this point forward compounds your professional and legal jeopardy." It was a final, calm warning, delivered with the certainty of a man who understood the law far better than the officer sworn to enforce it. Miller heard only insolence. He saw only a challenge to his authority that could not go unanswered, especially now, with an audience of silent judging eyes and recording lenses. His decision was made. He would make the arrest, invent the charges later, and rely on a system that had protected him a dozen times before. He lunged forward, grabbing David Chen's left wrist in a grip of surprising strength, a move that sealed his fate. The sudden, aggressive physical contact sent a ripple of shock through the onlookers. A woman gasped audibly, a sound clearly registered on the body cam's audio track. Miller's grip was tight, his knuckles white as he twisted David Chen's arm, preparing to force it behind his back. Yet there was no struggle. David Chen did not pull away, did not tense up, did not offer any physical resistance that could later be twisted into a charge of assaulting an officer. His body remained compliant, but his voice became an instrument of precise legal counter-assault. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, "you are now committing battery and unlawful detainment. Your actions are being recorded not only by your own device, but by at least 4 civilian witnesses. I am formally advising you to release me immediately. I am not resisting. I am informing you of your criminal liability." The statement was a masterpiece of de-escalation that sounded like an indictment. For a rational person, it would have been a final, desperate warning bell. For Frank Miller, whose entire sense of self was now tied to winning this confrontation, it was fuel on the fire of his rage. He perceived the calm recitation of the law as mockery. He yanked harder on Chen's arm, forcing him to stand. "Get up. You lost your chance to talk your way out of this," he grunted, the physical effort making his voice strained. The CCTV footage from camera 2, positioned directly above the table, provides a clear, overhead view of the scene. It shows Miller, a man consumed by irrational fury, manhandling a subject who remains utterly composed. It captures the moment Miller successfully wenches Chen's second arm back and the first handcuff clicks shut around his wrist. The sound was definitive, a sharp, metallic finality. This was the point of no return. In that single, irrevocable action, Officer Frank Miller had crossed a line from departmental misconduct into a federal crime. He had deprived a citizen of his rights under color of law. He did not know, could not possibly comprehend, that the man whose rights he was violating was not just any citizen. He was a senior federal agent with a security protocol that had just been silently tripped the moment his 10-minute check-in window expired. As Miller snapped the second cuff into place, securing David Chen's hands tightly behind his back, he felt a surge of triumphant satisfaction. He had won. He had asserted his dominance. He turned his captive to face him, a smug sneer forming on his lips, ready to march him out in a public display of authority. But the man he had just arrested did not look defeated or afraid. He simply looked at him, his gaze piercing and direct, and prepared to utter the 11 words that would detonate Officer Miller's entire world. What would you have done in David Chen's position? Let us know your strategy in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more of the story. The sudden, aggressive physical contact sent a ripple of shock through the onlookers. A woman gasped audibly, a sound clearly registered on the body cam's audio track. Miller's grip was tight, his knuckles white, as he twisted David Chen's arm, preparing to force it behind his back. Yet there was no struggle. David Chen did not pull away, did not tense up, did not offer any physical resistance that could later be twisted into a charge of assaulting an officer. His body remained compliant, but his voice became an instrument of precise, legal counter-assault. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, "you are now committing battery and unlawful detainment. Your actions are being recorded not only by your own device, but by at least 4 civilian witnesses and this establishment's high-definition CCTV system. I am formally advising you to release me immediately. I am not resisting. I am informing you of your criminal and civil liability." The statement was a masterpiece of de-escalation that sounded like an indictment. For a rational person, it would have been a final, desperate warning bell. For Frank Miller, whose entire sense of self was now tied to winning this confrontation, it was fuel on the fire of his rage. He perceived the calm recitation of the law as mockery. He yanked harder on Chen's arm, forcing him to stand. "Get up. You lost your chance to talk your way out of this," he grunted, the physical effort making his voice strained. The CCTV footage from camera 2, positioned directly above the table, provides a clear, overhead view of the scene. It shows Miller, a man consumed by irrational fury, manhandling a subject who remains utterly composed. It captures the moment Miller successfully wrenches Chen's second arm back and the first handcuff clicks shut around his wrist. The sound was definitive, a sharp, metallic finality. This was the point of no return. As Miller snapped the second cuff into place, securing David Chen's hands tightly behind his back, he felt a surge of triumphant satisfaction. He had won. He had asserted his dominance. To solidify his victory, he reached for the radio on his shoulder, doubling down on his catastrophic error. He pressed the button, and his voice, filled with misplaced confidence, crackled over the citywide channel. "Central, this is Officer Miller, badge number 714. I have one under arrest at the corner of Broad and Wall. Obstruction of governmental administration, requesting a transport unit to my location." The dispatcher's reply was immediate and routine, a voice unaware it was officiating a career suicide. "Copy that, 714. Transport is en route." The transmission was complete. His illegal arrest was now officially logged, time-stamped, and recorded in the NYPD's central dispatch system, an indelible piece of evidence against him. The call was completed. The transport was on its way. With the call completed and the transport unit logged, Officer Frank Miller's chest swelled with a primal sense of victory. The smug sneer he had been suppressing finally broke free, twisting his lips as he turned to face his captive.
He had done it.
He had faced down insubordination in a high-end neighborhood in front of a dozen phone-wielding liberals and asserted his dominance. The system would back him. It always had. His body cam, still recording, captured his triumphant expression in unflattering detail, a permanent record of the arrogance that precedes a fall. He tightened his grip on David Chen's cuffed arm, preparing to parade him out of the cafe, a trophy of his authority. But David Chen was not looking at the floor in shame, nor was he glaring with impotent rage. His expression was unchanged. It was the calm, patient look of a man who had waited for his opponent to exhaust every possible mistake before making his final, decisive move. The moment had arrived. Officer Miller, badge number 714. David Chen's voice was not loud, but it possessed a clarity and resonance that cut through the tense silence of the room, causing the officer to physically pause. Every word was perfectly enunciated, devoid of fear or anger, carrying only the weight of indisputable fact. You have just committed a federal offense under Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code by depriving me of my rights under color of law. You have also committed battery and unlawful detainment. Miller's sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. It was jargon, a cheap attempt by a jailhouse lawyer to sound intimidating. "That is not going to work, pal," he began to say. But Chen continued, his voice an unrelenting metronome of consequence. "My name is David Chen. I am a senior special agent with the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. My badge number is 88721. The words landed in the airless room like stones dropped into a deep well. The CCTV camera above the counter zoomed in slightly, as if the security system itself understood the gravity of the statement. Miller's face, reflected in the plate glass window, went slack. The confident swagger drained from his posture. It was a lie. It had to be a lie, a desperate, pathetic bluff. "You are lying," he stammered, his voice losing its baritone command, shrinking into a reedy, uncertain protest. "You are trying to intimidate an officer." "I have no need to intimidate you, officer," Chen replied, his gaze unwavering. "I only need to inform you of the facts. You have just placed a federal agent engaged in the surveillance phase of a multi-agency task force under unlawful arrest. The operation you have interfered with is designated Operation Hidden Ledger. By arresting me, you have potentially compromised a sealed federal investigation into a $40 million tax evasion and money laundering scheme." With each word, another layer of color drained from Miller's face. The patrons, who had been watching in silent judgment, now looked on with a kind of horrified awe. The body cam recorded the sudden sheen of sweat that broke out across Miller's forehead. This could not be happening. "As per my division's security protocol for undercover fieldwork," Chen continued, his tone as clinical as a surgeon describing a procedure, "my 10-minute check-in window expired precisely 4 minutes ago. The moment that window closed without my digital countersign, an automated high-priority alert was dispatched to my immediate supervisor, the regional SBI field office, and the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau command desk. That alert included my exact GPS coordinates. The transport you called for is no longer necessary. My colleagues are already on their way." Miller's hand, still gripping Chen's arm, began to tremble. His world, once so solid and defined by his own authority, was dissolving into a nightmare of acronyms and jurisdictions he could not control. He opened his mouth to argue, to deny, to take it all back, but the only sound that filled the cafe was the distant, unmistakable wail of approaching sirens, growing closer with every second. The wail of the sirens was no longer a distant, abstract threat. It was an approaching wall of sound, a crescendo of accountability that vibrated through the coffee shop's plate glass windows. The audio log from Officer Miller's body cam captures the escalating pitch, a soundtrack to the complete disillusion of his authority. The sound culminated not in a gradual stop, but in the sharp, percussive screech of tires on pavement as multiple vehicles converged on the location with tactical precision. The external CCTV camera, time-stamped at 2:38 p.m., documents the arrival. 2 black Ford sedans, unmistakably the property of the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau, boxed in a third, an unmarked black SUV with government plates that screamed federal law enforcement. Doors opened simultaneously. Out of the lead sedan stepped a man whose presence immediately commanded the room, even from the sidewalk. He was NYPD Captain Marcus Davies, a 25-year veteran with a reputation for zero tolerance for misconduct, his face a mask of controlled fury. Flanking him as they entered the cafe were 2 individuals in dark, impeccably tailored suits whose severe expressions and watchful eyes identified them as FBI. They did not move like police officers, they moved like hunters who had already cornered their prey.
Captain Davies's eyes swept the room once, bypassing the stunned patrons and their recording phones, and locked onto the scene at the center of the cafe.
The body cam footage shows his face transitioning in a matter of seconds from grim determination to abject horror, which then hardened into a white-hot, incandescent rage directed entirely at the uniformed officer. He strode forward, his polished shoes echoing on the concrete. "Officer, what in the absolute hell do you think you are doing?" The question was not a request for information. It was a roar of condemnation that made Frank Miller physically flinch as if struck. Before Miller could stammer a response, Davies turned his body, creating a protective angle toward David Chen, his tone shifting instantly from fury to profound professional deference. "Agent Chen, my sincerest apologies on behalf of this department. There has been a grave, inexcusable error." The words "Agent Chen," spoken with such immediate recognition and respect, were the public validation that sealed Miller's fate. They were the verbal confirmation of everything David Chen had stated, transforming Miller from an officer making a questionable arrest into a rogue cop who had just assaulted a federal agent. Miller's world, built on a foundation of blue-line loyalty and bureaucratic protection, crumbled into dust. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly, pale mask of disbelief. His hands, which still held the key to the handcuffs, began to tremble uncontrollably. The smugness, the authority, the racial animus, it all evaporated, replaced by the cold, stark terror of a man who had just single-handedly destroyed his own life. The quiet, metallic snick of the handcuffs finally being unlocked was not a sound of release, but the sound of his career ending. The body cam footage from Officer Miller, which he had forgotten to deactivate in his panic, now provides a damning first-person perspective of his own unraveling. As David Chen calmly rubbed his wrists, his expression unchanging, Captain Davies stepped fully between the two men, a human wall severing Miller from his victim. He turned to face Miller, his voice dropping to a low, seething growl that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier shout. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately," he hissed, the words precise and venomous. "You are on modified assignment pending a full IAB investigation, which I will personally oversee. Now, surrender your service weapon. Now, your shield, your radio." Each command was a public, ritualistic stripping of power. Miller's compliance was pathetic. His movements were slow, clumsy, the actions of a man in a state of profound shock. His shaking hands fumbled with the holster's retention strap. He drew his Glock, not with the confidence of an officer, but with the shame of a disgraced soldier, and handed it butt first to one of the FBI agents, who took it and cleared it with cold, practiced efficiency. He then fumbled with the clip on his vest, removing his shield, badge number 714, the symbol of his entire identity. It felt impossibly heavy in his palm as he handed it over. The captain took it without a word and pocketed it, a gesture of finality. One of the FBI agents finally spoke, his voice flat and clinical, addressing only David Chen. "Agent Chen, are you unharmed? Has the operational integrity of Hidden Ledger been compromised?" The question hung in the air, a stark reminder that Miller's foolish act of prejudice had potential consequences far beyond a simple false arrest. "I am unharmed," Chen replied, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. "The operational risk is currently being assessed, but the subject's interference was significant and created an unnecessary vector of exposure." The captain's face tightened further at the words "unnecessary vector of exposure." He gave the final order to the broken man before him. "You will be escorted to the first precinct. You will be placed in a holding room. You will give a full, uncoached statement to internal affairs. You will not speak to anyone else. Do you understand me?" Miller, a hollowed-out shell of the bully who had entered the cafe less than 15 minutes earlier, could only manage a weak, pathetic nod. His body cam, still recording, captured his own reflection in the window as one of the IAB detectives took his arm, not in arrest, but in a humiliating escort. He was no longer an officer of the law, but a subject of an investigation, a pariah being led away from the scene of his career's death, a spectacle for the very public he had once terrorized with impunity. The footage of his defeated, shuffling exit would become Exhibit A in the proceedings that would quantify his ruin down to the last dollar. The aftermath for Frank Miller was not a slow decline, but a controlled, systematic demolition. Justice, in this case, was not an abstract concept, but a bureaucratic process, executed with the cold, dispassionate efficiency of an audit. The Internal Affairs Bureau investigation, personally overseen by a furious Captain Davies, was a mere formality. The evidence was not just compelling, it was a multi-angle, high-definition indictment. Miller's own body cam footage served as the primary exhibit, a first-person narrative of his own career suicide. It was supplemented by the 3 crystal-clear CCTV angles from the coffee shop and no fewer than 6 separate cell phone videos provided by civilian witnesses who had eagerly come forward.
The IAB report, a document of 112 pages, concluded that Officer Miller had engaged in a pattern of behavior that was, in their words, a catastrophic failure of judgment and a flagrant violation of departmental policy, public trust, and federal law. His disciplinary hearing, held 60 days later, was not a debate,
but a sentencing. The police union, after reviewing the evidence, issued a terse public statement declaring his actions indefensible and declined to provide legal representation, an act of institutional excommunication that sealed his fate. He was terminated for cause, effective immediately. The first financial blow landed with the finality of a guillotine, the immediate cessation of his $100,000 annual salary. The second, more devastating blow followed, the complete and irrevocable forfeiture of his vested pension. After 15 years of service, the financial security he had been building for his future, a sum valued at over $2 million over a projected lifetime, vanished. It was erased by a 10-minute act of bigotry. The departmental consequences, however, were only the beginning. As David Chen was a federal agent, the incident was immediately escalated to the Department of Justice. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York convened a grand jury. Frank Miller was indicted on federal charges under Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code for the willful deprivation of rights under color of law. Facing the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, he accepted a plea deal. He was convicted of official misconduct and a misdemeanor civil rights violation. The sentence included 2 years of probation, 500 hours of mandatory community service, and a lifetime ban from possessing a firearm or holding any position in law enforcement or private security in any state. He could never again wear a badge or carry a gun. His legal defense for this criminal proceeding cost him $50,000, draining his personal savings. The final sphere of his ruin was civil. David Chen, represented by a top civil rights firm, filed a lawsuit not against Miller personally, but against the city of New York for the actions of its employee. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable video evidence and the high-profile nature of the plaintiff, the city's lawyers knew a jury trial would be a public relations disaster and a financial catastrophe. They moved to settle immediately. The final settlement was for $250,000, paid directly to David Chen for damages, emotional distress, and the violation of his constitutional rights. But the city's accountability did not absolve Miller's. A clause in the city's liability policy allowed for recovery actions against employees terminated for gross misconduct. The city promptly filed a civil suit against Frank Miller to reclaim the entire $250,000 settlement. This created a legal debt, a judgment against him that would follow him for the rest of his life, ensuring any future wages would be garnished and any assets seized. The total, immediate, and quantifiable financial damage was staggering. A $100,000 salary, gone. $50,000 in legal fees, paid. A $250,000 debt, owed. A sum of $400,000 in direct losses, before even considering the multi-million-dollar pension he had forfeited. He was rendered professionally toxic and financially destitute. While Miller's life disintegrated into a ledger of losses, David Chen's continued its upward trajectory. He returned to work the very next day. Operation Hidden Ledger, despite the brief and reckless interference, proceeded without a hitch. 3 weeks later, it culminated in the indictment of 12 individuals and the seizure of $42 million in untaxed assets. Agent Chen received a formal commendation from the Secretary of the Treasury for his professionalism under extreme duress. His calm, strategic composure in the coffee shop was not seen as weakness, but as a masterclass in tactical de-escalation, and the body cam footage of the incident was incorporated into federal training modules for agents nationwide. His authority was not just intact, it was enhanced. Justice in this documented case was a simple equation. An act of baseless prejudice met a response of absolute evidence-based consequence. Did Frank Miller ever truly comprehend the depth of his mistake? Did he learn that the authority he abused was a fragile trust, easily shattered by the weight of his own ignorance? Or was the only lesson he learned written in the cold, hard numbers of a bank account drained to zero and a future stripped of all its promise? Perhaps the most fitting moral is not found in his regret, but in the unalterable record of his downfall, a permanent, documented warning that in an age of accountability, the cost of prejudice can be calculated down to the very last cent.